Hi, friends. This is Donniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi from the Shalom Hartman Institute. And this is our podcast, For Heaven's Sake, Israel at War, day 614. Our theme today is entitled, The Clocks Are Ticking.
Plural.
In the plural. And I know it sounds ominous, the clocks are ticking. And we're trying to give a window into what's happening in Israel today. You know, we debated together, maybe we should call this a society in transition and flux. You know, we've talked about that so many times, but it's like the temperature of this transition is growing. And it's not just a transition, there's a sense that we're coming to moments of decision. The clocks are ticking. Now, Netanyahu, this is my impression, his whole methodology is to avoid deadlines, is to deny them, is to not make decisions until the absolute last second, and then when a decision is made, to have somebody else make the decision, especially since every decision will be partially unpopular, to present himself as the unwilling victim of a coalition, but he's still navigating us and saving us from the worst possible outcomes. And that's why, as we all know, Netanyahu's ideal coalition is one where there's people to the right of him and people to the left of him, and they battle things out. And then eventually decisions are made, but not by him. His decision is the statesman's decision, to be above and to let the children decide whatever they decided. But he doesn't have that balanced coalition, and in Israeli political environment today, the country's divided between just Netanyahu and just not Netanyahu. And the polls are roughly 65 seats in the Knesset, just not Netanyahu, 45 seats, just Netanyahu, and 10 seats, which belong to the Israeli Arab-Palestinian, the two parties of the Israeli Arab-Palestinian society. Part of them would join a coalition if they're invited, and part would not. But there's this split. Everything now is about him. And at this time, we're at a decision inflection point. And there are four primary inflection points that are, I feel they're assaulting us. It's like exhausting. It's like how many things, like every time you look at the website, things are changing, and each one of these issues is coming forth. Very briefly, the four are, the first is today there's going to be a vote on whether to disband parliament and call for a new election. If the vote passes, it still needs 3 additional votes by a majority of the assembly. If it doesn't, then the opposition has to wait 6 more months before it could put another legislation of this type. So if it fails today, the government wins 6 months reprieve. If it passes, there's a clock ticking. What's going to happen? Is the government going to survive? And to survive, the issue is whether the government passes a legislation that the majority of Israeli society, on the one hand, it survives as a government for now, and on the other hand, it undermines its ability to win the next election, because this is an issue that unifies most of Israel's society, i.e. the drafting of, the issue on the table, everybody knows, is the drafting of Haredim into the army.
The Ultra-Orthodox.
The Ultra-Orthodox. The second is Ultra-Orthodox society itself. Clock's ticking on them. What are they going to decide? Are they going to leave a government which is more favorable than any other government they ever will have? Or are there certain principles that they say, as we say in Hebrew, ad kan, up till here? Like, who am I if I don't stand? You know, Haredim, the Ultra-Orthodox, pride themselves as being a deeply ideological and principled community. Here it is. Is the study of Torah on the table? The clock's ticking. What are they going to decide? And within the next few hours, or could be the next couple of weeks during the upcoming negotiations, where are they going to go? Are they going to officially break with the rest of the country? Or are they going to somehow recognize that October 7th requires something from them? The clock's ticking. If you're not yet exhausted, the clock's ticking also on our relationship with world Jewry. The war in Gaza is draining. World Jewry sees the war in a different way than we see it here in Israel. You know, 70% of Israelis in a recent poll said, I don't want to even hear about Gazans. Just don't bother me, you know. But every day, something is reported again today. More people, We don't know all the details of why civilians are being killed. Does it have to do with the food distribution? Is it flawed or not flawed? Or is it Hamas manipulating, or who's shooting? And there's a lot of mess around it, but there's just a tiredness about it. And to really, in many ways, top a cake? What do you do? We have a member of the Likud party attacking a Reform rabbi, Gilad Kariv, who's a member of the opposition, saying to him, "Oh, you're a Reform man. Please leave the room. We Jews want to talk." And she says, "Oh, and by the way, when you officiated a bar mitzvah for a dog, invite me, I'll come." Like this, it's like the nightmare of this anti-Reform discourse. But what's worse is Netanyahu didn't mention a word. The only ones who condemn it, of course, the official, conscience of the country, the president, Herzog, the Jewish agency, but like nothing, not a word. It's just like as if they don't matter. But there's a clock ticking. And finally, the last clock is world opinion. We're feeling it. Israeli press is reporting it. We see now there's 5 countries who are condemning Israel and starting sanctions. There's sanctions against 2 of our ministers. Things are happening, and there's a clock ticking. Something is happening. It may be the 5th clock, but we don't want to talk about what we don't know, is a clock ticking on the end of the war. It seems that in a conversation, it's been reported on a conversation between the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States, that President Trump said, "Finish the war already. It's done. You're not achieving anything. And it's important for our negotiations with Iran and Saudi Arabia." It's like, go, move on. And there's conversations that within the next few days, we might be implementing stage 1 of some hostage deal. But we don't know. We'll have to wait for the news to evolve around that. But there's all these things happening, Yossi. I know this introduction is very long, and I apologize. But it's just, maybe you're exhausted. Not you, Yossi, because you love listening to me. But our audience, it's just been a long, but that's where we are. It's just the clock's ticking on so many fronts. And our world is going to change. Each one of these clocks, it's not a minor little issue. These are significant. Which clock do you want to start with, Yossi?
Donniel, listening to this litany of converging crises is so exhausting. It's so overwhelming. And you just say to yourself, he can't possibly survive this.
I had that same feeling. It's like, but everybody always says, "Oh, but you don't never count Netanyahu."
Right,
but I'm saying, like, really?
Really. And really, any one of these issues would be an existential political challenge to Netanyahu. And here he is facing all of them together. The one issue I think that is insurmountable for him, because in the end, he could probably continue to finesse the war and world opinion and Trump's pressure and the split with diaspora. The old Netanyahu would have felt this responsibility to the future of Israel. This version of Netanyahu feels only a responsibility for his continued governance, and he could limp along. The one minefield that he can't navigate is the Haredi, the Ultra-Orthodox draft. For the reasons that you said, that for the Ultra-Orthodox, this is what we say in Hebrew, Yehareg va'al ya'avor. This is the bottom line. This is the red line. It's the issue of ultimate principle for them. And what's changed in the dynamic of the relationship of Israeli society, the majority to the Ultra-Orthodox, is that it has also become a Yehareg va'al ya'avor,
a red line
for the rest of us. And we know, and the army keeps telling us this, it can't continue fighting effectively without an infusion of new recruits. And the only community that's left is the Ultra-Orthodox.
And if I could just add to that, not just fight effectively in Gaza, because the war might come to an end, but it can't defend the borders effectively.
And if you project 10 or 15 years from now, the Ultra-Orthodox today are 15% of the society. In 15 years from now, there'll be 20%, 25%.
20.
30 years from now, there'll be a quarter of the population. So are we going to exempt a quarter of the population? And we know that this arrangement began in 1948, when there were a few hundred yeshiva students.
I believe it was 400.
400, exactly.
Ben-Gurion agreed to exempt 400 of the top Talmud students.
As we say in Hebrew, he was being large. He was being generous. And it's become impossible. And, one can argue the pros and cons. And I understand the Haredi world on this. I really do. I understand that it isn't only about the study of Torah. In some ways, it's about the preservation of their way of life, which really depends on separating from the rest of society. And the army is a melting pot. And they're afraid of that melting pot for good reason. Even though the army has set up structures that can help them maintain their lifestyle, there's no hermetic seal. And the Haredi world worked heroically to reconstruct after the Holocaust. And this is a threat to them. The problem is, it's also a threat to me. And what you have now in Israeli society are two existential threats, or two perceptions of existential threats, converging. And we're the majority. We're going to win. The question is, how far will Haredi society go in breaking, as you put it, in
it's not just that we're the
bonds?
majority. Their ability to survive is dependent on our willingness to fund our own existential threat.
That's right,
This is the
exactly.
paradox.
That's right. So even if we come to the point where, and I think we might, and you've said this in the past, Donniel, that, we're not going to draft you by force, but we're cutting off all the funding. Once a Haredi young man turns 18, the funding stops. Now, the basis of their separatism, and this is their fatal weakness, is that it depends on the largesse of an increasingly aggrieved and threatened majority. So it's not sustainable.
I don't know if you noticed when there was a tipping point on this, is when the Haredim in the coalition agreement insisted that the government pass a basic law of Torah study, in which the country not only funds the ability of the ultra-Orthodox community to maintain their position that they could only exist separate from the country, which is just, if you try to put your head, it's not even good.
You can go crazy.
You can
really.
go crazy. But they wanted to pass a law in which the government would decide that we, the secular and religious Zionists, we, those who serve in the army, send our kids to the army with all the price, that we should officially vote that the study of Torah is an existential importance to the country, just like the soldiers. Like, that was a bridge to it. You want to do it, you do it. You want to take the money, take the money. But now you want me to actually officially declare that you're as important as me. And that's what October 7th changed. Because, we're exhausted. Israeli society who serves are exhausted. We can't do it anymore. People, my friends are all, we're old, so we don't go anymore. But our kids go and our grandchildren go. Frank Hosius, my son just got a 3-month, now, another 3 months. Yeah. This is his 4th 3-month. What are you supposed to do? And here you have someone saying, no, you vote to declare my importance to you. That was the tipping point.
Yeah.
Israeli society can't tolerate it anymore.
You said something just now in passing that I want to slow down and focus on. You said that the secular and religious Zionists are both outraged. Now, that's new, because in the past,
that coalition
is new, and I think that the fault line that's emerged within this coalition between the ultra-Orthodox on the one hand and the religious Zionists on the other is the most important fault line at this moment politically, because that's the fundamental threat to the stability of this coalition. What has held together...
In other words, it's not the opposition which is against the draft exempt. It's Netanyahu's right-wing coalition partners.
Donniel, this is the first time that Netanyahu couldn't pass a bill that he defined as essential to the survival of the coalition. The revolt happened from within the Likud. It happened from the religious Zionists, his religious Zionist allies. He can't do it. That's why
and
we've
the
come
religion,
to this.
right? And the religious Zionist Edelstein, who's the chair of the Security Committee, which has to agree to the legislation. So he too, it's like
He's a religious Zionist.
He's a religious Zionist.
A Likudnik. But this is the first issue that the Likud, it's that you see a revolt.
Because do you know how
on
Netanyahu...
principle. Who could have imagined a revolt on principle within this iteration of the Likud?
It's remarkable. And it's so interesting, when you see how Netanyahu's been functioning, anytime he has a contentious issue, he just decides between him and Ron Dermer. They just decide. So here it is. The government has decided, I know it's a whole other issue, but it's relevant. They've decided to begin to arm and fund a new force in Gaza. And we're funding weapons to someone whom we never heard before, someone named Abu Shabab.
Head of a gang, basically.
Basically, he's probably some mafia.
Right.
He's some mafia guy who is corrupt. Everything is no. And today, the Minister of Finance, his chief partner,
the guy who's funding the guns,
the guy who eventually has to distribute the guns, who sits on his security on the committee to determine everything, says, no one spoke to me about this one. So here it is like this. No one told me we're funding a mafioso. We're giving him guns that could be directed against Israel. Now, in this case, I happen to think that Netanyahu's right. I'm not saying anything about Abu Shabab, but eventually we're going to have to find some serious Palestinians who are going to take over from Gaza.
This is not that.
This is, I don't even think, this is like, there's a joke.
I hate to say it. I agree with Smotrich on
See,
this.
like here, I want to just, I don't know. I don't think, this is part of the issue. I don't think any of us know enough. I don't even think Netanyahu knows who Abu Shabab is. I don't think he's even thought about it. He's just found somebody who maybe could help do some of the security for the distribution of the humanitarian aid so that it doesn't get in the hands of Hamas, which is, by the way, a legitimate.
Absolutely.
I think this was, I feel it should have been done a long time ago, but it's absolutely legitimate.
And the international community has ignored the fact that Hamas has been hijacking the aid from the beginning.
That whole thing is just insane. But this Abu Shabab, here it is. So now Netanyahu can't. Actually, it's what is it? What did Brandeis say? That sunshine is the ultimate anesthetic. Disinfect. Like here, Netanyahu can't. It's not between Dermer and Netanyahu anymore. This is actually
right.
They have to pass a law, and the Supreme Court is sitting and watching, and his coalition partners are saying like, I don't like half the things he's doing. He's just doing on his own.
So do you think we're seeing the beginning of the unraveling of Netanyahu's internal authority?
I think what we see is that the clocks are ticking. Literally, like I don't. It's just the problem is that all of them, anybody in the coalition, their deep self-interest is to remain, because Smotrich, Minister Smotrich, I like to show him respect. Bezalel Smotrich, in every single poll, he doesn't pass the threshold to get into the next Knesset. He's not making it. This is the end of his political career.
Right.
And Ben Gvir swallows him up, and the religious Zionist community becomes a party which moves predominantly into the Likud or into Bennett's party. It's the end of the religious Zionist party for this next round at least.
Yeah, there's one more element here, which is that Netanyahu has essentially given Smotrich a free hand to stampede toward annexation in the territories.
Could you do me a favor, Yossi? That's another clock. Could we designate one of our upcoming issues? Because
we have to talk about this.
Things are changing in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, under Bezalel Smotrich.
And we're not paying attention.
No. And it comes we have to talk about this because this has long-term impact. But it's like this one's exhausting enough. If we could just leave that one alone, like that's enough. We'll talk about it. But part of the problem is we're so exhausted that Smotrich knows that we're exhausted, and he's creating.
We're distracted by these other clocks.
We're exhausted by them, and we're picking our battles. But I think the issue of Judea and Samaria is something that we're going to have to talk about whether we like it or not, and I want to. So part of the challenge here is that at the end, are they going to vote for their dismantlement knowing that the Likud can't win the next election, or unless Netanyahu somehow finds a way to spin this? So I never want to count him out. Mm-hmm. But the clock is ticking. Something is going to be happening over the next couple of days, either before our listeners here or the next couple of weeks. This is the government, Haredi society, two huge clocks that are going to reshape all of our conversation. It could be that we're in a completely different arena. Pick the next clock that you want, Yos. Is it world Jewry? Is it world opinion? Are they connected? Is it, which one do you want to talk about?
Having recently come back from a lecture tour in North America, primarily within the Jewish community, I'm especially sensitive to what's happening now. And the gratuitous insults against our last supporters, basically, which is Diaspora Jewelry, and how elements within this government almost make it a point of pride to alienate.
So how do you understand the
Jews.
silence of Netanyahu? Because he was always the one who understood that world Jewry are a strategic interest of his.
Not for him. Not for him.
They used to be.
Well,
they were a strategic interest. Not for him. They were for Israel.
They were for Israel.
So you're making that distinction.
Absolutely. And this is exactly the line that divides the
old Netanyahu and the new one.
Yes, the Netanyahu who really not only cared about his own political interests, but also cared about the state of Israel. This version of Netanyahu, and we see it in policy, cares almost exclusively about his own survival. And as we've said before, Donniel, he's come to the point that fatal miscalculation that many leaders make, especially leaders who've been around for too long, which is a complete identification of the leader in the state. And what's good for the leader has to be good for the state.
Right. And so Galit Distel Atbarian is one of his most effective attack dogs. She is, if there's something vulgar to be said, she will be the one who says it.
Though there is stiff competition.
There is stiff competition, but she's one of the better ones. And everything is just Netanyahu. So he unleashed her. And in this context, is it world Jewry or my coalition? As you said, sometimes I'm shocked, sometimes I'm surprised, not by even what's being done, but by the silence. It's not even an issue for him. It's like everything else has sort of disappeared, and all he has now are these short-term tactical moves that need to be made to keep his government going.
I think that's a crucial
whatever the
insight.
price
it's a crucial insight, Donniel, that Netanyahu has become the master of the tactical on all fronts. All of the ticking clocks that you mentioned.
I just don't think he's the master of it.
Well, now what's happened is that his ability to expand the time frame of the tactical has been curtailed.
His tactics aren't working anymore. They're not working with anybody.
Yeah.
But you see the price, and you and I are so committed to the loyalty of the Jewish people to each other and the loyalty of the state of Israel to world Jewry. And we spend so much of our career trying to work to ensure that world Jewry doesn't walk away from Israel. And that to be a Jew is to be in a vital relationship with Israel and to see Israel as an integral part of your Jewish identity, not some overseas allocation. This is what we do day in and day out. It's our deepest commitments. And to see it, there's enough problems as it is. And there's issues that I can't solve. And it's true that 6,000 to 10,000 miles away when you see the war, it's different than when you see it here. And there's going to be differences, and there's ideological differences. But this level of disrespect, disdain, this goes, you know who speaks this way? This is the way the Ultra-Orthodox used to speak.
That's right. And it's now filtered into the Likud.
It's filtered, and like this, and it's normative, and only, thank God, you have President Herzog, but he doesn't carry weight in Israel, but he's such a decent man. That's it. There's a decency. Better would never tolerate it. There's where is your decency? It's just gone. That leaves us,
when I meet with reform or conservative congregations, and you see the love for the state of Israel, and you realize how many insults
how much
swallow.
When are we going to get to the tipping?
I'm so moved by that, by their love for us.
See what I see?
Their unrequited love.
When I travel, and maybe we also go to I see people just holding on.
Yeah.
They're trying to hold on. And they're trying to hold on for themselves, and they're trying to hold on from their kids and their grandchildren. And just when's the moment where you're just going to say enough? And the Prime Minister of Israel, hello, there's a clock ticking, there's something happening. And the assumption, when Humpty Dumpty, you're not always going to be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Part of this, this children's, what is it called, rhyme or whatever it is, trying to teach kids that, all the king's horses and all the king's men, not everything is resolvable. There's consequences. But that consequences leads us to the last ticking clock. And that is world opinion. It's a different world right now, Yossi.
It is. It is. And I've been out there, as you know, since October 8th, defending this war passionately in media outlets in North America, in Europe, facing fair amount of hostility, but nothing compared to now. The discourse has fundamentally shifted against us. And honestly, it's getting harder to defend this war. A few weeks ago, Netanyahu said at a press conference that the goal of this war is to implement the Trump plan. And by the Trump plan, he meant the expulsion of Palestinians. We talked about this in the last, I think we did. It's hard to remember from one episode to the other. And I might have mentioned in that episode as well, but I think it's worth repeating. The commander of the IDF, Zamir, made a point of responding, not directly, indirectly. He went to the front to meet with soldiers in Gaza, and he laid out 3 goals of the war. And he said the first goal, pointedly, is bringing the hostages back, which Netanyahu is now saying is not the first goal, it's the second. Second goal is bringing Hamas down, and the third goal is changing the political reality on the ground in Gaza. No mention of the Trump plan. Now, in Israel, the culture of the army is to submit to the will of the politicians, of the government. And that's always been a foundation of Israeli democracy. This time, the army realizes that it has to signal a break with the government, but is doing so subtly, and maybe a little too subtly, because I think a lot of people missed the drama that's going on here. I guarantee you Netanyahu did not miss it.
Netanyahu.
So as long as the army is not following Netanyahu into the moral abyss of making expulsion the goal of this war, we're still holding on by our fingernails to the edge of the cliff. But, Netanyahu has led us into one abyss after another. And this is the final abyss, the moral abyss.
I have never been a great advocate of public relations, as if public relations could solve Israel's problems. And there's so many people who fall into the trap of either believing that we could solve the problem with better public relations, or there's nothing that we could say because they're going to hate us anyway. And I feel that this government is not even trying. See, I'm against this stage of the war, but there are serious issues that could be talked about. You can make a case and say this war would stop if Hamas would disarm itself. You can make a case that we're willing to do a hostage deal and even an end of the war, but Hamas has to agree to disarm itself. And if it doesn't agree, how could I bring a war to an end? You can make an argument or try to defend the complex reality on the ground when civilians are killed. This move to distribute humanitarian aid in a way that is not given over to Hamas is a perfectly legitimate, not only legitimate, is morally and justified under moral categories and under international law, to give humanitarian aid over to Hamas so that they could steal it and thus strengthen their stranglehold on Gazan society. All of this is legitimate. In other words, you can make a case, but you know what happens every single time now? Civilians are killed or something happens. Do you know what the response of the Israeli government is? We're investigating. We don't even, our military spokesperson is not even competing anymore.
Well,
he's not even.
Why? Because Netanyahu fired the last guy, Hagari, who was so effective. He wasn't his person. He couldn't.
This guy is also supposed to be effective, but he doesn't even show up. So here it is. And Israel says we're investigating. 3 days later, we might come up with a result, but by then nobody's listening. Israel has abdicated. I'm not saying that public relations alone would solve all of our problems, but we've abdicated the conversation because that goes back to what you said. We've abdicated the moral discourse. The conversation will assume that there are moral standards that apply to us that we're willing to abide by, and let's argue about them. We're even trying to undermine the chief advocate of the army who's ensuring that Israel works and abides by international law and by the rules of war. And so it's like we've given up. We've given up trying to win a moral argument. And so you could say, you know what, that's why today Israel's public relations is they're anti-Semites. You're anti-Semites, a plague on. It's it. But the clock is ticking. And we have to ask, this lack of decision, and I think, it's part of the internal conversation, because right now, all Netanyahu wants to talk about or work on are the tactics to enable this government to survive. This type of conversation assumes that there's a moral discourse that his government doesn't abide by. It's not for naught that different countries have now decided to sanction ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Whether you agree with it or not is not our issue today. But it's not for naught. These people have said, not on October 7th when you're traumatized, but now. They talk the most horrific things about the expulsion of Gazans, etc., much worse than Netanyahu himself. So that's his audience. Keeping that quiet, it's as if it doesn't matter anymore. And so like we're watching, and Israeli newspapers are reporting more and more events, more Israelis who are being attacked in various places in the world. We're not going to go back into the war against the Jews last week. And it's as if we've relinquished any responsibility to try to explain what we're doing, to justify morally. I'm not saying that everything that is happening is justified. But try. What is it that we're doing? When we're not doing something right, make a mistake. If you accuse us of something that we didn't do, say it quickly. Now, it's just silence. And that silence, the clocks are ticking, and somebody's looking for tactics to stop the clocks instead of solve the problems, because at the end of the day, clocks ticking are just a metaphor. And you might want to stop the clock, but it's a metaphor for profound challenges that we're facing and that we're not meeting. Yossi, last words. Maybe you have something uplifting?
Well, on October 8th, this government was handed an enormous gift. And that is the renewed unity of Israel. And it has succeeded in squandering a gift that it didn't deserve, but we deserved. And what we're seeing now is the unraveling, maybe still in slow motion, but the inevitable unraveling of the inconsistencies that this government has tried to finesse. And so I'm very hopeful this week. I feel that we may be turning a corner, and that what has been obvious to many of us in the year before October 7th, which is that this government is divisive in its DNA and is the wrong government to lead this people, that is becoming increasingly apparent. And so that gives me hope.
So maybe with the clocks ticking, the good news is that maybe this government is coming to an end, and that Israeli society will be put in front of a serious decision. What type of government do we want to have? And what type of society we want to live in?
Do we want to go back to October 6th, where we're tearing ourselves apart? Or do we want to try to hold on to October 8th?
Or not that alone, but to a new future. A future where October 7th doesn't define us anymore either. Let's see. It's an interesting time, exhausting time. I apologize to our listeners. It could be that these clocks that are ticking are going to shut off by the time you hear. Could be that 6 other clocks will be there. What's certain is that clocks are ticking. It's exhausting. This is, for heaven's sake, Israel at War, day 614. Yossi, wonderful to be with you.
Always.